We do have some people join. Got some. We'll just give it 30 seconds. Okay, I think we're ready. Brilliant. Hello everyone, my name's Shannon. I am a member of 2020 Productions, and we are an organisation that have helped facilitate with speech reads for quite a few years now actually. So I'm an event manager, and it means that I organise live experiences and events, but also virtual ones like this. And I would love to introduce you to Sita Bramachari. And Sita has written lots of books. One of the ones that you guys have been reading, which is Where the River Runs Gold. She writes books from ages 7 to being an adult. She's also written plays. Her books have been published in lots of different languages, including Mandarin, Danish, Turkish, and Slovakia. She's won international awards. She's a human rights ambassador, and she's also a resident writer at a refugee centre in London. She loves poems, short stories. She's a doodler and a daydreamer. And I'm gonna let Sita introduce herself if she has any more information to give you now.
Well, thank you, Shannon. What a lovely introduction. In case you're wondering, where is Sita Bramachari? I am in what I kind of imagine metaphorically is my story hive. And for those of you who've read Where the River Runs Gold, you'll know that Shifa and Temba don't have books. They don't live in a world, in the near future world, they don't live in a world where they've got stories, access to stories, but they collect little bits of pages of stories that are still left around the city, and they take them to their story hive. So this is kind of my happy place to be when I'm writing stories and creating stories. And I can't quite believe that I've written all of these stories, but I have been writing stories since I was your age. And it's amazing to me that you who are probably never meet can pick up one of my stories that will just come from this strange planet, which is my head and my imagination, and read the characters that I've created. So it's lovely, lovely to be here.
Amazing. So we are joined with schools from all across Fenland and East Cambridgeshire, and we have some home education students as well. And just for everyone, we have questions from you guys already, and I will be talking through those with Sita and questioning her. But we also do have a Q&A option, and we have a chat. So if you do have anything burning that we haven't answered, please feel free to pop them there. Brilliant. So Sita, would you like to tell everyone about the piece of paper and what that's for?
I would. So I am hoping, before we start answering the questions, and in fact, what's brilliant about this is you don't have to feel at all like you have to look at me while we're answering all of these questions. You can just be kind of, you know how you take in some things and other things go over your head, or you connect with some things and other things aren't what you connect with. So all of the time during this session, I want everybody to have a piece of paper, a piece of square paper that hopefully you've got on your desk, and hopefully some lovely colours. And as I'm answering the questions, I want you to do what I do when I'm writing stories. I want you to let your imagination roam. And there may be some things that I say that you'll doodle those words on the page, or there may be like an image of something that comes into your mind when I said something. Doodle that on this piece of paper. And then at the end, I'll show you what we can turn this piece of paper into. I'm hoping that this might be the start of your inspiration for a storytelling competition that we're going to tell you about at the end of this session. So pens at the ready and start doodling really from any time from now on. You might be seeing things behind you, like thinking, why is she sitting with a tree? Those of you who've read the story will know that this is a survivor tree, a very, very important tree in my story, Where the River Runs Gold. So get doodling from the start.
Brilliant. So to kick off, Sita, how did you start out as an author?
So I began writing really when I was about 7 years old. I was a very, very, very dreamy child. I had those sort of random dreams. You might be like this, that you know, you get up in the morning, you think, I better not tell anyone about that dream because it was so random. And some of my characters have dreams like that. I used to write them down, and I used to write them down into dream journals. And some of those dreams have ended up in my stories. So I was 7 when I started to write. But I was 40 when I started publishing all these books. I was very shy, and I didn't show my work to anyone, and I didn't really think that stories like mine would be published. So it took me a long time to show my stories to anyone.
Well, that's wonderful. I also have very vivid dreams, so I might start writing them down too. So we have a East 1 class at Park Lane Primary, and Casey has asked, does anyone help you when you're writing?
What a good question, Casey. Well, there's a whole team. When you're a published writer, there's a whole team of people that help you. So your number one person is your editor. And you know, you send your drafts of your manuscript in to the editor, and they'll sometimes say, there's a big problem here, or I'm not quite sure that the readers are going to connect with this character, and they'll ask you to change something. A bit like when your teacher will say, oh, this could be better, or this could be, that's your editor. And then there's also amazing people who do all the design, and you can see I love artwork. This story magically has just arrived. This is my new story that just arrived today. And so you can see that there's a beautiful cover for this story. And some of you might be, you know, love art. And so these artists start working on your book, and they kind of look at this lovely binding. It's cloth binding. They work out things like how your book's going to look. And for Where the River Runs Gold, they did all this gold foil. And it made me feel really special because a book with gold foil means they think it's a really good book. So there's designers, there's editors, there's the people who do the illustrations, which aren't necessarily the same people as on the covers. So you can see this was Evan Hollingdale, this wonderful map. Maybe some of you are doodling maps right now, or trees, I don't know. But this is a different person. And he is sent the story, and then he has to make some illustrations. So all of this team of people help create these books.
Wonderful. I have a question from Burwell Primary School, and Molly asks, what gave you the idea to write this story? I know you said about your dreams, but this particular one.
This particular story really came from my worry, because I have 3 children, who are 2 of them are really grown up, and one of them's doing her A-levels now. And I was just thinking about, you know, the planet, of what, you know, for future generations, what kind of planet we are leaving behind. And obviously with climate change, David Attenborough was always a kind of hero of mine growing up. And then at the same time as I was publishing Where the River Runs Gold, Greta Thunberg had her book published. And the fact that young people like yourselves were kind of standing up and saying, how can it be that, you know, we are creating a planet that is not going to sustain itself for the future? What are we going to do to change? What are you waiting for? We've got years. And I wanted to write a story that felt urgent, you know, that it wasn't kind of messing around and sort of being sort of, oh, it's sweet and we can do this and that. I wanted to write a story which looked at, if we don't do enough to prevent climate change and to protect our beautiful planet, what would the world look like? And that's why I set it in the near future world.
Amazing. So we have a question here from Orange class at Beaupre Community Primary School. Was Shifa a paragon before Niall found her? And on that, do you want to explain about the story a little bit more for those that have?
That is such a good question, and I've never been asked that question before. Okay, so in this near future world where this book is set, but for those of you who haven't got to that point, it's divided. The structure of the society is paragons, who are like the leaders. And there's this place called paragons of virtue, and it means that people are really virtuous. But the leaders in the land, like the arch government, they are not virtuous at all. They are rubbish. And then there's the freedom, and that's everybody. That's really us. That's everybody else, which is, you know, the people who go to school, who need healthcare, that are doing Zooms like this. That we're freedoms, and we're kind of ordinary people. And the freedoms have to kind of buy into the system. And if they buy into the system, then if they're poorly, then they get their health looked after. And if they buy into the system, then they get to have their children educated to the age of 12. But because the bees have disappeared in the land, the children are needed to pollinate the crops with their little fingers. So at the age of 12, the children go away to these places called Freedom Field Schools, to Freedom Field Farms, to pollinate the crops. So if you're a Freedom, you get education till 12, and then your children go to help food production in the land. And then there are another group of people, and they're called outlanders. And these are the people that refuse to follow the laws of the land. Now, Shifa's mum was an outlander, and that's why at the beginning of the story, Nabil has carried her around from hospital to hospital saying, please help my wife. And sadly, no hospital would take her because she's an outlander, and therefore she gets none of the rights that the land offers. And that's why Shifa is an orphan at the beginning of the story. It's very sad. Very sad, but it is based on a reality in the world, in many countries in the world. Nothing that I have written in this book isn't happening somewhere in the world, like today. Children who are working, sometimes the clothes that we're wearing, we have to be very careful that they haven't been made in a factory by children. Sometimes the food that we eat, the packaging it comes in, is compromising the planet. All of these things I was thinking about when I was reading the book. Pesticides that are being used are affecting the bee population. That's also affecting the way we breathe. So I really, when I wrote this book, I was not very good at science at school, but I learned a lot about science. I learned a lot about, how we could change and regenerate our planet. What's really hopeful is there's a G7 conference at the moment in Cornwall, where the leaders of the world are getting together to try and work out how we're going to save this planet, and have positive action. What's really amazing that I found out when I read this book is how quickly places can regenerate, how quickly the wildlife can come back. And we saw this at the beginning of lockdown in London, where I live, that the bees and the butterflies and the insect population and the wildflowers really regenerated very, very quickly. So that really was something that really went into the story too. But yes, if you're an outlander in this land, you don't get any of the services or the rights that you would need.
Brilliant. We have a question from Park Lane class. And Isla would like to know, are you writing a book right now?
Isla, I must say to Isla, your name is in one of my books. It's called Corey's Rock. Let me see if I can find it in my story house without knocking everything over. Yeah, this is Isla in Corey's Rock. This is one of my stories. What a lovely name. Isla, I am editing 2 stories at the moment. So it takes me not so long to write the stories, but it takes me a long time to edit them. It's like polishing a jewel. I am editing a story I wrote 10 years ago called Artichoke Heart, because Macmillan Children's Books are republishing an anniversary edition, and I hope you get to see it's a beautiful new cover. And I've edited that for modern audiences. And then I'm writing a book for November, which is called When Shadows Fall. And it is about some of the difficulties that young people are facing with mental health today. And it's about the need for communities to come together to support young people with their mental health. It's all told through the eyes of an 18-year-old boy. And then, as I said, today, this arrived for younger readers. And I'm going to show you, I probably shouldn't, I'm going to show you the beautiful illustration at the end of the story. This is the refugee centre that I work in London. It's a really beautiful place. Today is World Empathy Day, and it's a place of community and people coming together with difficulty. So I often write about those themes. I don't shy away from difficult themes, but my characters are really courageous, a bit like Greta Thunberg. They will stand up for the good, the common good of many, many people.
Amazing. We have a question from Orange class at Dupree Community Primary School, and it's following up from what you were saying about when you're publishing. How long did it take to write Where the River Runs Gold?
Where the River Runs Gold is my thickest book. There you go. Look, this is my latest little book for younger readers, and that's that, so you can see. And then The River Whale, which is my World Book Day story. You can see there's a lot more words in this one. This took about 4 years to write. The idea I had for it, I had when I was a child, sitting by a river in the Lake District, in the hollow of a tree, which I used to call my survivor tree, and it was my like special place to go. If ever I had an argument with someone or I felt stressed, I'd go to this tree and listen to the river. So you can see I've always been inspired by nature. So I've got something here. Well, where is it? In my story hive here. I wanted to show you, which is a painting palette, and it's in my first novel, Artichoke Hearts, and it belongs to the grandmother. And she gives this palette to her granddaughter. And one of the things I didn't understand when I was growing up was that, you know, the kind of things that you really care about, like the environment, or, you know, you might think about something like racism, for example, which I've written about, or just something that's unjust, like that some people are using food banks, which obviously I've written about in Where the River Runs Gold. And I put kind of the ideas down, either in writing or painting, or however I was expressing myself. And what I didn't realize was that the ideas that I was having when I was your age are the same ideas that I've got now to write a story. I'm still exploring those ideas now. And no one told me that when I was growing up. I just thought I had this random imagination that nobody was going to be interested in. And I really want you to understand that, you know, the things you care about and the little poems you write, or the, you know, when you think no one understands you and you go into your room and slam the door and write a song or something, that stuff, if you're going to be a writer or a filmmaker, whatever you're going to be later on in your life, that stuff is still the stuff that you'll be wanting to explore when you're old like me.
On that, again, if anyone would like to leave any questions in the Q&A or the chat function, please do. But follow up from that, we have Park Lane Primary in Whittlesea, and they have asked, other than yourselves, who is your favourite author? And this is by Suki.
Oh, that's a really good question, Suki. It's very difficult for me to answer because there's many of my favourite authors. I love poetry. I love the poetry of W.B. Yeats. I love an Indian author called Rabindranath Tagore. And then I love, for young people, my favourite author is David Almond. And he actually inspired me. He wrote a book called Skellig that some of you might know. He's written lots of books, but Skellig is my favourite. And I think it was his first book as well. And that made me think, when I read Skellig, which kind of treads that line between the real world and a sort of fantasy world. So it could be a homeless person, but it could be an angel. I thought, oh, that's where I like to write, in this kind of magic realism territory, where, you know, a cat could be a cat, but it also could be a spirit that can help you through your life. And so I love David Almond's work. I love magic realism. Isabel Allende is a wonderful writer that I love. So many writers the God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy is one of my favorite stories. And that's about the magic in small things. And I've always been excited about the idea that, you know, you have, like, I've got on my desk, let me see, in my story house, the charm that the grandmother gives to her granddaughter in Artichoke Heart. And she says, carry this with you all the way through your life. Many of you will have something that's been given to you that has kind of a special meaning. And the God of Small Things is all about the special meaning of the small things that ordinary people carry with them. And that's really what I love to write about too.
That's beautiful. At Burwell Primary School, Mia has asked, why did the Manito not allow the hare to kill itself?
That is actually probably one of the best questions I've ever been asked. And it's really exciting to me because I know that you've read that book of the book. So I, very specially for you, I have brought a necklace to show you. It is a necklace which depicts the hare in the moon story. So I thought I would show you. So my dad, I know there's going to be people there who have a dad or a granddad or a mother or a carer or just someone you know who's a really good storyteller. My dad was a great storyteller, and I'm going to introduce you to him now. Good afternoon. I believe that Sita is speaking to you about her stories. Well, if it wasn't for me, she would not be a storyteller at all. I was a fantastic storyteller. She was very shy when she was a child, did not speak much at school, had some difficulties communicating, so I used to tell her stories. It was me that told her the story of the hare in the moon. Would you like to hear it? Okay. Once there was a hare and a monkey. And what else? A hare, a monkey, and if you read the story, you will find out. Okay. Mother Nature was very upset. Mother Nature came down from the moon and said, "You are making such a mess of this earth. Why are you polluting the planet? Why are you making it so difficult for your children to breathe? Why aren't you sorting out the climate change?" Nobody could answer this. And then there was a child, and the child went and they sat with these creatures in the forest by a fire. And Mother Nature says, come on, find me some food on this planet. But there was very little food. So the monkey went off, and all around the world, looking for food, came back with a few little pieces of food. And then the other creature, you will have to read the book to find out what the other creature is, went off, just a little piece of food. Then the hare went off around the world. You know, hares have very, very, very long legs, very good at running. Maybe some of you are very good at running like the hare. Round the world, round the world, round the world, found nothing. Then came back and said to Manitou, Mother Nature, I have found nothing. I will give you myself. So the hare prepares to leap onto the fire. And the hare is just about to leap onto the fire when Mother Nature catches the hare by the leg and says, no, 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 no. You will not give of yourself to me to eat, for I am a vegetarian. And then Mother Nature took that hare up to the moon. And if you're in your classroom, you could do this, what my dad did. And take your hand and take them here and take this hare, this little hare, and throw it up to the moon. Come on, everyone together. 1, 2, 3. Up into the moon to remind the humans how kind and empathetic on this World Empathy Day that hare is to give of themselves to the earth. And we must all take responsibility and do our little piece to help Mother Nature. And sometimes you will look at the moon and you will see there is a shape a little bit like a hare in the moon. And then you will remember to look after this planet and why this beautiful, empathetic hare was willing to care for this planet so much.
Wonderful.
Does that answer your question?
Yes. Do you have some more examples of how empathy is used in the book?
That's a really good question. There's so many moments, aren't there? You can probably think of some of them, but one of the moments I'd like to show you came from me working with some young people in Sheffield. And there were some young girls. I worked on Empathy Day on another year, and they sent me a letter afterwards. And in this letter, the children told me that they'd seen, after I'd worked with them and told them about what empathy was and sort of tried to explore that in one of my stories, these girls cut their hair, had very, very long hair beyond to their thighs. They cut their hair for children who had cancer, and they wanted children's hair, not the adults' hair. They wanted children's hair, so they cut their hair as an act of empathy for children. And those of you who've read a bit of Where There Was Once Gold will know that Shifa cuts her hair because hair is valuable in this future land, and she sells her hair in the agora, in the marketplace, and she sells it so her father can have enough to eat. That's an act of extreme empathy. But you'll see through the book, you know, Shifa and Temba, there are very, very many empathetic things that they do for each other in the story, because Temba thinks of the world in a different way. He is not so much of a communicator as Shifa. He draws and he understands the world in another way. But never underestimate the way that Temba sees the world with his map making, because in the story, it's his special way of listening and his map making that helps them save their own situation. So even the way that Temba listens is a kind of empathetic action. The way that we listen to each other is an empathetic action. And then there's other characters like Luca. So you might meet Luca at the beginning of the story, and Shifa doesn't like Luca at the beginning of the story. She thinks he's awful because he has been brought up by the corporation, the kind of Freedom Field Corporation, and it's quite a harsh way to grow up. And he's quite tough. He's got this kind of really tough sort of you'll know people like this who kind of seem really tough but aren't really on the inside. And he's like that, Luca. But as we go through the book, you'll see the many wonderful empathetic things that Luca does. Sometimes people do lots of sometimes there are some people who do lots of lovely things for other people, and you know that they've done lots of lovely things because they tell you about it. But there are other people who just quietly do lovely, kind, and empathetic things. It doesn't have to be a big thing. Sometimes it could be just smiling at somebody. There are many instances in the story when you're writing scenes in the story, you really have to kind of, it's a bit like you have to be inside the story. It's a 3D experience when you're writing. So just a smile from somebody and how they raise their eyebrow or how they don't turn away from the character when they're speaking to them, that's all written into the text of the book. So I think the amazing thing about reading fiction is, obviously I wouldn't want you to go on this journey because, or any of us to live in this land, but you get to go on this adventure and you get to empathize with all of these different characters. And it's a kind of practice for life. When you come across somebody like a Luca character at the beginning of the story, you might think, oh, they're a really kind of tough person. But because maybe you read a book a long time ago, you might think, oh, there might be a bit of Luca in that book where the river runs gold. Yeah, so that's the amazing. So I write empathy into every page of my story.
That's wonderful, because empathy is not just something for you to feel, it's also a really great skill that will serve you through life always. Amazing.
And it's really interesting because the head of Empathy Lab, it's a very big empathy they say, she told me that only 10% of our empathy comes from what's passed on to us genetically, and the rest is what we learn through our lives. And I didn't know that bit of science. And I think, of all the experiences I've had in my life, that really makes sense that you can build empathy. It can grow. It can be a seed that you plant and it can grow. Just to remind you, I hope you're not being too good and looking at me and Shannon all the time. I hope you're doodling ideas on your what's going to be something very special by the end of this session. Keep doodling. Don't get distracted and be good and look at us all the time. Keep doodling as we're speaking.
They say that you're actually a product of the top 6 people that you surround yourself with. So that's why it's good as a friend at school to be empathetic and to be kind, and then you pass that on to your friends as well, just by surrounding yourself with them.
I've not heard that. That's a really lovely thing. And I was thinking that this morning because I went on the empathy walk. I don't know, obviously this book, these young people, they experience nature for the first time. I don't know if you've got to this bit, but towards the end, they experience the freedom of nature for the first time towards the end of the story. And I went on an empathy walk this morning with my little dog, Billy, who's actually sitting under my desk. And I decided, this was a bit extreme, I decided to go barefoot. So I walked really slowly so that, and I live in London, so, to wash my feet afterwards. But I walked very carefully so I could kind of see everything. I could see glass on the pavement and I could see someone had thrown something away. And I was noticing things that I didn't necessarily notice. But on that walk, Billy, my dog, kept looking back at me. He noticed that I was walking in a different way. So animals can look at you empathetically. And then at the duck pond, I put it on Twitter, there was a mother duck sitting with her babies, and she was really protecting them. And I thought, empathy is everywhere. It's not just in the human kingdom, is it? It's in the animal kingdom as well.
Absolutely. So we have some questions on Zoom, actually. Oliver from St. Peter's has asked, how did people react when you said you were going to be an author?
I didn't tell anyone I was going to be an author. I was completely secretive about it. And I just kept all my work secretive. Only my dad, who you sort of met with a hat, he used to say, I don't know if you've got parents like this, he used to say, because I was working the theatre and I was working youth theatre and education work. And my dad used to say, what are you going to be? Are you going to be a social worker? Are you going to be a teacher? Are you going to be a writer? When are you going to write your book? And I don't know if your parents are a bit like, or carers are a bit like that. It has to be kind of quite clear cut. But I've done many, many different jobs in my life. And so I was very shy. And I just, for some reason, I didn't think that the stories that I wanted to write would have an audience. And I could not believe it when I wrote After Chet Heart. And it was the first book that I'd written. And actually my partner said, you have to send it to agents. It got a publishing deal and then it won the Waterstones Book Award. And then all the books that I've written since have been published because of that. So what I would say to you is, no one wants to be arrogant. Do they go, oh, my book should definitely get published because it's the best book. But you should try to be confident, because I think I could have possibly maybe published books earlier, and I would have had more time to be in this amazing story hive that I found myself in and create more stories.
Actually, Park Lane class, Kaus has asked, how did your book get published? How did you get it published? What's that process?
So it's a very interesting process. What you do is you send it to an agent. An agent is sort of the person between the publisher and the writer. Most people have to have an agent. It's someone that it's like your publishing friend. And you send it to the agent, and the agent says, oh, I really like this book. I think this publisher would like it, or this publisher is looking for a book like that. They kind of have their eyes in the world, and they go to all the book fairs. And they knew that Macmillan were looking for a little bit of a book about Arthur Hearts, and so they published that. But I published with many different publishers now. And sometimes different publishers are looking for different kinds of books. So you have to kind of know what the agent has to know what they're looking for. So then basically the agent deals with the contracts and the publishing deal, and then the whole machine kicks in. Somebody asks about the editors, and that kicks in, and then they give you a deadline, and then you have your deadline in your mind. I've got to finish Weather and Untold by this date, and then that's when you start to feel a bit kind of like, oh, can I do this? And all the doubts kick in, but I keep doing it, so I guess I can do it.
That's why learning deadlines at school pays off.
Yeah, that's right.
So we have another class from St. Peter's School. They said, what does a groit look like?
Oh, a groit. Oh my goodness, this is so exciting for me, because that means you actually read the story. Okay, a groit. So for those of you who haven't got to that point, a groit is the mode of currency in these lands in the future, in the Kairos lands in the future. A groit is sort of this big, sort of that big, and it's made in copper. Sort of copper's not gold and it's not silver. Look up something that's copper, and it's quite thin. It's not like a £1 coin. It's more like a 1 penny piece of thickness. And on the front of it, it's got the ARC government logo. And those of you who've read the book will find that throughout the book, like, when Nabil is sent letters, you've got the ARC government logos here. Here we are. And actually the groit looks a bit like this. So it's quite interesting. Those of you who really love art, when I sent all the words to the designer and artist, they came up with all of this stuff. And they said, oh, well, you've kind of written it into your book. But I actually hadn't written all the detail into the book, because you don't want to read those books, do you, where the writer's kind of like making you see the world so much how they see it, that you feel a bit manipulated. You want to give a little bit of space for your amazing imagination to think, well, what is a groit? Maybe I'll design a groit. Yeah, you don't want to put too much in. Absolutely. Maybe you're going to design a groit on your seed packet. Who knows?
We have had from quite a few people actually ask how you choose the character names, how you find inspiration for them and where you get them from.
So I am from my first novel, I am really obsessed with names. Partly it's because when I was a child growing up, I never found a Sita in a book, apart from in a mythological story that my dad brought from India called Rama and Sita, that maybe you've learnt at primary school. And that was I never found a contemporary Sita in the book, and I really wanted to. And so now, because I've met so many thousands and thousands of children as I've gone around schools, and sadly can't meet you now and sign books and find out what your names are, although I've heard a few. When I'm signing books, I ask people their names, and sometimes I say, oh, that's a really nice name. I've never heard one of those in the book. Can I borrow your name and put it in a book? So Shifa is somebody that I did meet once. Okay, Temba, I've also met a Temba once, but also I like the names to have meanings. So Shifa means healing and Temba means trust. So quite often, if I start with a name, a bit like a baby being born, as happens at the beginning of what's the first thing that happens? A baby is named. So as soon as I've named my characters and I've given them names which have meaning, it kind of helps me. Temba's all about trust. Does he trust? How difficult it is to trust? And then that gives me the plot line. Shifa's all about spreading hope seeds and healing.
That's brilliant. That's exciting. So we have a question from Orange Class, Beaupre Community Primary School, and they've actually asked, was Temba adopted?
So Temba isn't adopted. So Temba is Nabil's son. Yeah, it's Shifa who's adopted. And so right at the beginning of the story, if you read the kind of the terrible storm that hit, and I was thinking, I work in a refugee centre in London, and one of the things that I wanted to write, these lands are called the Kairos lands. And in Greek mythology, Kairos is I love this. Some of you might like this, some of you might Google this. You know, in time, you know, you get up in the morning and you go to school, the time runs like that in a linear way. But in the Kairos time can run parallel to real life, like a kind of virtual space, like we're in now, maybe. But so, and in Kairos time, unlike in real time, a day doesn't begin and end with a night. In Kairos time, anything is always possible. It's like a portal of possibility in Kairos time. Oh, now I've lost my thread. Tell me the question again.
Oh, it was.
Oh, sorry, I got busy talking about Kairos time. Now I've forgotten the question.
Off too.
Oh, the beginning of the book. It was about Temper being adopted or not. And so in the beginning of this book, in the storm, Nabil is trying to get back to his birth son, Temper. And then upstairs in the warehouse, he hears what he thinks is a cat crying. But in fact, it is a cat up there, but it's a baby crying, and that's Shifa. So he's lost his wife because she was an outlander and couldn't be treated at the hospital. So Temper is his son, whose mother is gone, and Shifa is the orphan who's from the outlander parents upstairs. She's now on her own with just a cat sitting on her tummy, protecting her.
And is that why the cat protected Shifa?
Yeah, you know what I was saying about animals and empathy earlier on? I usually have an amazing animal in my stories, and actually in this one I've got several. So I've got the hare, and I've got the cat. I've got one for Temba and one for Shifa. And because these children are in great peril and danger at some moment in the story, and they really have to dig deep to survive the life that they're in, these animals are kind of their spirits, they're kind of their guides, and they're special creatures, they're familiars, and they walk by their side. So for every character that I create, even if I don't put them in a book, I have a familiar, a creature that is your special person. And you could look around your class and you could do it as a little exercise. Maybe you're doodling it now. Maybe you're doodling your special creature on this piece of paper. But everyone in your class could do a little exercise where they could think, you know, what would be my special creature? It could be like for Imtiaz in my World Book Day story, it's a whale. Yeah. And
what would yours be?
Oh, it's a seal. So it's in for Isla. So I remember Isla. I can't remember my story how where I've put the book now, but in Corey's Rock, there's a beautiful, beautiful image of a seal. I can't find my book now. Here it is. And whenever Isla kind of, you know, feels she needs help, she turns into the seal. And if you've ever seen a seal by the sea come out of the water and sort of peer up at you, got this sort of human type eye. And from a child, I always thought seals were magical creatures. Also, I love swimming and water.
I think I'd be a unicorn. But we have
be a unicorn.
Thomas.
Magical.
Thomas from Folksworth would like to know, what books did you enjoy reading as a child?
Oh, lovely question. So I grew up in the Lake District, and I grew up with all the Beatrix Potter stories. I've been talking quite a lot about the natural world and animals, and obviously that's important to me in Where the River Runs Gold. So the Beatrix Potter stories, which were kind of animal stories, but actually they're really about like how humans live in the world. So I love those stories. I loved Alice in Wonderland because I lived a lot in Dreamland, and I still do. And I also I didn't read lots and lots when I was growing up because I was doing a lot of writing. But what I really found when I was about in year 6 at school was Maya Angelou's work, which is actually you would think she's a writer for older. I was quite ambitious as a reader, so I sometimes wanted to read things that people thought were too grown up for me emotionally. but actually I could cope with them. And one of the things about Where the River Runs Gold is some adults who've read it go, God, this is like an adult book. I could read this. And should children be reading stuff like this? And sometimes adults will say things like that. But of course, you as young people and my children kind of know what goes on in the news. You know there are unaccompanied refugee children walking around the world. That might be your experience. You might have survived it. So I always think to try to protect young people from some of the difficulties that are going on in the world it's not a great idea. What we should try to do is create stories which allow you to explore those things in a safe way. And so I was reading stories like that. Maya Angelou opened my eyes to racism and inequality when I read Where the Cave Bird Sings. And so those were the sort of stories that I loved growing up. Some of them were kind of animal stories, but some of them were very much real world stories that opened my eyes to some of the things that aren't fair in the world. And maybe some of you have siblings or younger children in your family who go, it's not fair, or maybe you yourself go, it's not fair. I still do sometimes. And sometimes adults will say, well, life's not fair. And I've never accepted that as an adult. I think life should be more fair. So that's a kind of big pull of what I was reading when I was little. It was about fairness.
Brilliant. So Spencer from Burwell has said, have you ever written or would you ever write a series of books?
Oh, very good question. I have actually. I don't know. They're in this pile and I dare not pull it down because it will probably all tumble. But it's Artichoke Heart, which is my first novel. And then the second one was Jasmine Skies, which isn't in the pile. And then the third one is Tender Earth. So they all contain this artichoke heart charm, which the grandmother gives to her grandchildren in Artichoke Heart. And this charm goes through all three of those books. And those stories are about one family and how they grow and they change as the world grows and changes. So the narrator in Artichoke Heart is Meera, and she grows up in Jasmine Skies and goes to India and Calcutta to meet her wild cousin, who's a dubstep DJ working out of derelict houses in Calcutta. And then the narrator of the third book is the baby in Artichoke Heart, Lila, who finds her grandmother's banner bag. And Lila lives in kind of present day world. And she lives in a world where things are happening like the refugee crisis that she's very aware of. She finds a bag that her grandmother had, the grandmother that gave this charm. And she opens the bag and she finds all of these banners that her grandmother carried. And she starts carrying those banners herself. So this charm is kind of like what we inherit from one generation to another, and that passes down through three books.
Brilliant. Sophia has asked, who is your favourite character from Where the River Runs Gold?
Hard, Sophia. I think maybe it's Temba.
Brilliant.
I think maybe it's Temba, because Temba is so fragile, and yet he's so strong. And he actually, I don't want to give away the story, but you'd think that Temba is going to be a victim in the story. But and I'm not a writer that plots very, very carefully. I work from emotion with character, and I let the characters take me to where they're going to take me. And Temba took me on a really big journey in the story. And I sort of know Shifa very well. So I wasn't surprised by Shifa, but I was sometimes surprised by Temba. But the person that surprised me most was Luca, who, when I first started writing him, was much more of a kind of conventional villain. And he went on a really big journey through the story. And by the end of the story, my heart really went out to Luca, to have grown up in this kind of really strict institution and never to have experienced things that a child should have experienced. And I really like Luca in the story.
Wonderful. Alan from St. Peter's has asked, how does it feel to have your book published and available across the world?
It's a little bit of magic. It's a little bit of magic. I mean, my book Swallow's Kiss arrived this morning, And I was like Christmas. It was like Christmas. I was like, oh, got the door, and I was like leaping up and down. The postman, he was like, what is the matter with this woman? It was my box of books, and it come from my imagination. And there was Swallow's Kiss, and every time it's a bit of magic. It makes me think. Don't. It makes me think. You know those random thoughts you have. Oh, but I could never do that. Never do that. Always think it might be possible, because there's something so beautiful. And I know we read books in lots of different ways now, but there's something so lovely about a book in your hand. And you know that survivor tree and that hollow you can go and curl up with that book and read it. And the fact that I've made these books, it's really it's an amazing thing for me. I still look behind me and go, Sita Bramachari, writer, really? Is she? Who's that?
So on that, East one class at Park Lane Primary have actually asked, if you weren't an author, what would be your chosen profession?
That's a really good question. I would have been a midwife. And when I wrote Artichoke Hearts, I had actually signed up for a midwifery course, because at school, I didn't do biology. And so in order to become a midwife, I would have had to do A-level biology. And I was prepared to do that because it was a dream of mine. And I still might do, maybe not be a midwife, but I might help later on at something called a doula. I might help people when they're giving birth. So I just think it's a miracle. And I very often have babies in my stories and the beginning of life in my stories, because at the beginning of life, the potential is there for everybody. And I find it really magical. So yeah, I would have been a midwife, but then these books became successful. So I've been busy writing.
Wow, that's wonderful. And that was a question from Jack. So we have a question in the chat from Lily from Burwell. Which one of your books are you most proud of? And also we've had a few questions about what your favorite is. So I'll answer those both.
Oh, Lily, I really, you know what, it's really difficult. I can't tell you. It's sort of like, it's like the one you're working on, you're completely obsessed at the time with it. And it's the one that kind of isn't formed yet. So you really, really care about it. And you have to kind of feed it with the right things and look after it. And then it goes off to the publisher and you think, I'll never write another book again. That was so exhausting. And then an idea springs into your head, and then that's the one you love the most. And those characters are the ones you love the most. So the books that I've written, these books, I love them all very much for different reasons. But it's the one that I'm writing on, always the one that I'm writing that is the one that needs the most care and that I'm the most kind of obsessed with. I'm a bit in love with all of the characters in the story. And one of the things that my children, who are now a bit more grown up, used to say is, Mum, why are you looking like so stressed about this? I said, well, the thing is, it's really difficult because the children have to go to food and field school. And I really just don't know. I mean, should I send them away? I mean, there's resonances of Nazi Germany on that train. Is that too much? Is that, I mean, what's going on with it? And that my children would go, Mum, like, you know, can we have breakfast please? They're not real, these people. And I was like, no, they are real. They're real to me. So it's like you live with these characters while you're writing the book. And then there would be too many characters to live with if you live with all of them all the time. So you let them go. So the books you've written are kind of the children that are in the world that are kind of doing okay.
It's interesting how you immerse yourself into that writing experience and how you really kind of like when you're doing a play and you stay in character all the way through the rehearsals and even sometimes in real life to really get into that character when you're doing a movie. That's interesting. So Jasmine has asked how it felt as the first book was being published. I think you touched upon that, but how does it feel when you publish a book? And
so it was so, Jasmine, it was so emotional for me because, you know, my dad, he had told me, why don't you become a writer? You like to write all the time. He had passed away. And I stood in the middle. If any of you ever get to go to the Piccadilly Waterstones, this is not an advert, Piccadilly Waterstones, it's just an incredible bookshop. It's just got so many books in it. You walk in that as a writer and you think, oh, how is it possible that anyone's ever going to find any of my books? There's so many books here. It's an amazing palace of a bookshop. And I was standing there receiving the Waterstones Award for my first book. And my very nice husband had the artichoke charm that I'd made up in my story. He'd had it made for me, and he'd given it to me that day. It was just a little piece of magic, getting that book published. It was a bit like somebody waving a wand, like in a really young children's book, and going, "Your wish too can come true." And it had been such a kind of quiet and secretly held wish to become a writer from my childhood that I really could not believe that it was happening to me, even as kind of 40-year-old woman. And a bit of me still can't believe that I'm allowed to spend my days in this story hive, making up stories and then talking to you children about my book. It's a magical thing to do.
Yeah. I think you have touched upon it, but Park Lane class Sophie would like to know what made you want to be an author.
I think, Sophie, yes, I have touched on it, but maybe I haven't answered that completely. It's because I was so shy when I was growing up, and I didn't really then. I know you think, oh well, she doesn't stop talking now, but you learn as you grow older to kind of, to get over certain things, certain challenges. But I used to express myself in a very kind of solitary way through diary writing and travel journal writing and art, and I never thought anyone would be interested in the way that I was expressing myself. So I think it's always been an usher in my new book, When Secrets Set Sail. She writes in journals and, thinks that people don't really understand her. And I was a little bit like that when I was a child. And so I've always been writing. But I never dreamt that I actually could become a writer. But I think it was, different people have different ways of expressing themselves. There'll be people among you who are, the person that gets the main part in the play. And then there'll be people like you who like to do the design or do the lighting or more technical or, do the health and safety or, I didn't, all of those roles are in society. And it's each of them is a way of expressing yourself. You just have to find the way that is your way. And writing is my way.
Yeah, exactly. And that really is life. Marley from Burwell Village College Primary would like to know how many books you have written.
Well, as of today, when it came through the post, I think it's 14.
Wonderful.
Some of them are big, some of them are little, some of them are short stories, and some of them are anthologies as well.
Amazing. Angel has asked, what your favorite part to write was in Where the River Runs Gold?
I think it was the last part in Meteora Mountain.
Mm-hmm.
You might not have got to it, so I don't want to spoil it for you. But when I was just after university, when I went to Greece and I worked there for a little while teaching English as a foreign language, and I went to a place called Meteor, which is not unlike Meteora. It's an amazing place if you ever get to go there. It's a monastery and it's on a mountain, and it just rises up out of this flat plain. And inside the monastery, there's kind of like gardens and there's trees and woodlands and it's called Meteor. Meteora means between heaven and earth, and Meteora means between earth and sky. And so it's always stayed in my mind. And so when I was writing it, I was picturing that place and how magical it was. And I was picturing all the beautiful woodlands because I love woodlands. They feature in lots of my books in Red Leaves as well. And I love that, like a magic of light and shadow coming through the trees at different times of the year, the changing wood. And so that was a kind of, when you do something just for yourself. When I was writing that bit of the book, it was just for myself. It was, let me create a sort of heaven on earth in the wood, and that was it.
Wonderful. On that, Mari asked, will you write about Cairo again?
Very interesting. Now, I never like to say not. I never like to say no because the mind is very strange. So when I wrote Artichoke Hearts and Jasmine Skies to the person that asked about series, I wrote them as a block. Those were commissioned at the same time. And then somebody at the end of that story, because I leave the story literally in the air where you don't really know what happens to the characters. And someone said, you cannot leave it like that. You've got to write another one. I didn't have another book. It was only like 7 years later that I realized that the baby in Artichoke Hearts would be the narrator. and then I could write that story. So sometimes it's quite a psychological journey when you write. You don't always have the answers. So I want to tell you a little bit about where the river runs gold. Is that some people at the end of the story, it splits people, this book. So if you've got to the end of the story, you'll know that there's a kind of ending in the time of the Kairos time, and then it goes forward into the future, and you get a picture, a little snippet of a picture in the future. Now, some people are really cross with me that I don't say what happens in between. That would have been book 2. Yeah. So I would have ended it on the cliffhanger, and then you would have had book 2. But what I wanted to do, because this is something about that, the G7 is happening right now. It's something that's urgent in our world. I wanted to leave that space for you in your generation to go, what are we going to do? What's going to happen? And I left that space because I thought that's a book that you might write. And each of you in a class might take that space between the end of the Kairos time and the future time and go, what happened? How did we regenerate the land? How did we make things better? How are we going to do it? What happened? What was the process? Mm-hmm. So that's what I did. And then later you see the Survivor Tree, there's a book and there's some of the answers. But I don't tell you what the answers are.
Okay. I am gonna fire a few final questions at you. Yep. So I picked 4.
Quick fire round.
Okay. I think potentially they may have missed this, but where do you get your inspiration from in general?
Okay, everywhere, literally everywhere. Sometimes traveling on a bus, listening to a conversation, the landscape, the people that I've met, the experiences I've had, the travel and other books. Yeah.
Where do you get the titles from?
Yeah, I usually think of the title straight away. They come straight away into my brain, except for the last book, When Shadows Fall, which has taken a long time, but I'm really pleased with that
title. Which one of your books took the least amount of time to write?
They've all taken quite a long time. I think maybe short stories that I've written. Amir and George is a short story, but it's been printed and republished 5 times. It's about a refugee child, and it just came out of me. I just wrote the voice.
Wonderful. Do you ever struggle with writing, and how do you deal with that?
Lots of times, lots of struggle. Sometimes I get stuck. No, I don't really get stuck, but sometimes I get worried. Mm-hmm. I'm always writing. I'm always doodling, always writing my notebooks. But sometimes I get sort of overthink things, mm-hmm. And then I have to kind of go into my wild imagination space and I usually take my characters into a wood and kind of let them adventure a bit, and then I unblock myself. That I don't tend to get writer's block, but writing can be quite difficult sometimes.
Have you, or would you write a book based on real life events? I know it's inspired by, but would you do based on real life?
Yes, I don't think I would write a documentary book, but I've written lots of books which are based on real life events, like Amir and George. It's about a boy who goes to do a public speaking competition, and he meets at that public speaking competition George Orwell. Well, George Orwell is dead, but he meets the ghost of George Orwell. So a bit of it is really in the real world, and then a bit of it is about fantasy. And I like that connection because it's like the Kairos land. It gives you an opportunity to use your imagination and to think about the possibilities.
Mm-hmm. How much has your writing improved from when you first published to now?
Very good question. I have been re-editing Artichoke Hearts, which is my first novel, and the very nice editor who was at school when she read Artichoke Hearts said, "Oh, I love this book. I love this book. It was the first book that I read where there was someone in it like me." All this kind of stuff, and she gave me 40 editorial notes, and she was very embarrassed. I said, "You don't have to correct them if you don't want to, really." Anyway, I sent her back 660 editorial notes. I was like the nasty editor, and I said, "Can't have this. Can't have this. Why did I write that? That's not very good." So I was like editing my own work as a writer that had written 13 books.
Amazing.
So writers are never happy. Even when I read the book, when it's published, I'm like, that could have been better. That could have been different. Why did I mix it? Yeah, you're always correcting.
anyone who loves what they do, there's always changes in society, and you're always wanting to perfect and tweak. Okay, last one, and then we will wrap up. Callie from St. Peter's would like to know more about Daisy and when Daisy came to Shifa.
Yeah, so Daisy the cat, but also Shifa has her Daisy in her locket. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Daisy, in my imagination, Daisy had in the storm lost her family, the cat lost her family, and she found this baby in the warehouse, and she thought it was another kitten, and she went and sat on its belly. And when I was writing that opening sequence, I was imagining the cat's heartbeat against Shifa's. So the baby Shifa felt like this cat was her first mother. And that's why there's this kind of supernatural connection between Daisy and Shifa all the way through the book. Yeah, she's with her all the way through the book.
Amazing. Yeah, wonderful.
What about the seed packets, Shannon? We mustn't forget the seed packets in the competition.
No, we will not. Do you want to go ahead?
So I'm just going to do this. Take your piece of paper, okay? Fold it into a triangle. Fold it again like this. So it looks like that on that side. Fold it again like this. Then you can tuck it in. And if you can't do that as quickly as I can, it's because you haven't made as many Shifa seed packets as I have. And you will have a little seed envelope which you can keep with you secretly through Region 4.
Do you want to show it a bit clearer from the other side? There we go.
So it's like that on that side, and it's like this on this side, and you could either put a little sticker on it there, or you can fold it in without anything, and there it is. And if you open it up, it looks like a little beak, actually. And so I think you've got, look, there you go. Hello everyone. I can see how silly I am. Then you put your seeds inside, and what we would like everyone to do is keep your seed packet of inspiration from today with all your own storytelling ideas in it. This is the beginning of you planting your forest of creativity. And that is the theme of our competition, Forest of Creativity. You're invited to write a poem or a free verse piece of writing in the style that Temba maybe speaks in poetry and free verse, and the river whale is written in. There's not loads and loads of words, but pearl and jewel-like words. And maybe you want to add an illustration to it for the competition too. And then you're going to submit your beautiful creative work inspired by today to the competition. But today, on the way home, on Empathy Day, you're going to get your seeds and place them in your seed packet and find a beautiful place and scatter them along a little path. And maybe you'll return to that path, and maybe you'll see those flowers growing like in Shifa's garden. And you'll remember that on Empathy Day, 2021, we met, you read a story, and you did an act of empathy, which will actually bring the bees and wildlife and rewild where you live, wherever you live. So I think that's the idea, isn't it? So we're hoping to spread lots of creativity and empathy.
We did drop some seeds off to all of the schools, so you should be able to get some seeds from your teachers, and then yes, plant some beautiful flowers, and one small step to improve the environment and the planet. But as Sita mentioned, we do have a competition, and the submissions will be closing on the 2nd of July. We'll also email the teachers with the information that you already have already. And it will be to create your own spoken word, your poem, what the forest of creativity means to you. But thank you so much. We have run over just a few minutes, and I've seen some people dropping out because I'm sure the lessons are ending. But thank you everyone so much for joining us on Empathy Day for a Q&A with Sita, and thank you so much to Sita for joining us. It's been wonderful, and I hope everyone enjoys reading Where the River Runs Gold, and getting in touch with nature and letting their creativity flow. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Shannon. Yeah. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone. Bye.